The night had always been my accomplice. It covered my mistakes, blurred my movements, and swallowed my tracks. In a small town like ours, darkness was the closest thing to freedom. The street lamps buzzed and flickered above me, throwing pale circles of light that left more shadows than they cleared. My boots struck the pavement in a rhythm I knew too well, sharp, hurried, meant to stay one step ahead of trouble. Trouble had my name on it that night. Alex, petty thief, small-time hustler, a man with too many regrets and too little patience. I wasn't proud of what I did, but pride doesn't put food on the table, and shame doesn't pay the rent. So I kept moving, slipping between alleys, darting past shuttered shops, hoping the silence of the town would cover me like it always did. But that night the silence felt different. It felt heavier, tighter, like the air itself was watching me. I had just lifted a wallet from a drunk outside the bar, quick as lightning, clean as a magician's trick. My fingers still burned with the memory of that brief contact, the moment when someone else's life was in my hand. The leather was still warm in my pocket. It should have been enough. Easy job, simple escape. No reason for things to go wrong. And then I heard it, a sound that cut through the night more sharply than my footsteps. A single echo, measured, steady. Not a drunk stumbling home. Not a neighbor out for air. A step with weight behind it. Authority. My chest tightened, and I picked up the pace. The alleys in this town twist like veins, narrow, damp, and lined with old brick that smells of rain and smoke. I knew them better than anyone. I thought I could disappear into them the way I always had. But the footsteps followed, never rushed, never frantic. Just certain. That certainty scared me more than anything. I cut through a side street, my heart pounding harder than my lungs could keep up. The drizzle had turned heavier, spitting against my face, running down my collar. Every surface shone with wet reflections. Neon from the liquor store bled into puddles like cheap paint. I wanted to believe I was still invisible, but the sound behind me told me otherwise. I cursed under my breath, the word hot in the cold air. I'd been careless. Normally I checked twice before making a move, but tonight I trusted luck. And luck was nowhere to be found. Stop. The word came low, firm, not shouted, but carried with a weight that hit me harder than if it had been screamed. It froze me for half a second. It was a voice I recognized without knowing the man, a tone that didn't ask, it commanded. My father had used that same tone once, years ago, before turning his back on me. The memory slammed into me, and for the briefest moment my legs almost stopped moving. But instinct overruled everything else. I bolted. The alleys narrowed. My boots splashed through puddles. My shoulders brushed against the dripping walls. The world felt like it was closing in on me, funneling me into a place I didn't want to go. The footsteps followed, steady, relentless. Not rushed. The sound of a hunter who knows the prey has nowhere left to run. I rounded a corner too fast, slipped slightly on the slick ground, caught myself against the wall. The alley ended in a dead stop, a brick wall, tall and dark, rain running down its face. My stomach dropped. Dead end. I spun back, chest heaving, and that's when I saw him. The officer filled the mouth of the alley. Broad shoulders, uniform darkened by the rain, cap low over his face. The lamplight caught the water dripping from his brim, turning each drop silver before it hit the ground. He didn't look like a man out of breath. He didn't look like a man who had just run me down. He looked steady, calm, in control, and that made him more dangerous than any handcuffs ever could. I pressed my back against the wall, eyes darting left and right, searching for an exit that didn't exist. My pulse thundered in my ears, loud enough to drown out the rain. He stepped forward. Not fast, not slow, just deliberate. Each movement told me running was pointless. I made my choice anyway. I lunged sideways, hoping speed and desperation would be enough, hoping I could slip past him in a blur. But he moved faster. His hand clamped around my arm like iron, spinning me before I could twist away. My shoulder hit the wall, cold bricks scraping through damp fabric. I shoved against him, but it was like pushing against stone. He leaned in, his forearm pressed lightly but firmly across my chest. His eyes, gray, steady, unreadable, locked on mine. We were too close, breathing the same damp air, the rain dripping down our faces. For a second, the world shrank to just that alley, just him and me. I spat the words out, rough and defiant, though my voice betrayed the unevenness in my breath. "Let me go." His reply came low, calm, unshaken. "Not happening. No handcuffs. Not yet." Just his grip, steady and unrelenting. I expected the metallic click of steel any second. But instead, he held me there, letting the silence stretch. Finally, he spoke. "You've got two choices. Jail or something else." I stared at him, confused, caught between fight and collapse. "Something else." He nodded once, measured. "Community service. You work, you show up, you keep yourself in line. I'll be watching. Miss a day, you'll see the inside of a cell." For a moment, I laughed, short, sharp, bitter. "That's it? You think sanding wood and sweeping floors will fix me?" His expression didn't change. "I think it's better than wasting the rest of your life behind bars." The rain drummed harder around us, but in that moment it felt like the whole world had gone quiet. I realized I wasn't looking at an enemy, not exactly. I was looking at a man who had already decided my fate, and was offering me a rope instead of a cage. And that scared me more than the handcuffs ever could. The workshop smelled of sawdust and varnish, the kind of smell that clung to your skin even after you'd left, the kind of smell that got under your fingernails and refused to wash out. Every morning I walked through that wide door, and every morning I told myself I wouldn't last a day. The benches were stacked with wood in various stages of repair, tools lined up in neat rows, as if order itself could redeem a man. I didn't belong there, not with my history, not with the things I'd done in the alleys of this town. But that was the deal. No prison bars, no cell, no steel door slamming behind me. Only this room, these planks, this endless sound of scraping and hammering. And him. Always him. Ethan didn't hover, not in the way you'd expect from a cop, but his presence was constant. He leaned against a beam, clipboard in hand, or crossed his arms while watching me from the far side of the room. He didn't need to speak for me to know he was measuring every motion I made, like I was another broken chair leg he meant to test for cracks. I hated the feeling of his eyes on me, heavy and unyielding, but I hated more that I couldn't ignore them. I dragged sandpaper across a board, careless at first, hoping to annoy him with sloppy work. But he never snapped. Instead, he'd walk over, lower his voice, and correct me with quiet patience. Steadier. With the grain. I would mutter under my breath, too low for him to catch, though I always suspected he heard. The silence between us was sharper than any insult. It filled the air like static, buzzing at the edges of every exchange. When I finally broke it with a sneer, his calm only made me angrier. "Enjoying the show?" I asked one afternoon, throwing the sandpaper down harder than I meant to. "Must be nice, standing there like some king, watching me sweat." He didn't flinch. His gray eyes held mine, steady as a nail driven into oak. "I'm here to see you finish what you started," he said simply. And then he walked away, leaving me boiling in the wake of his composure. The work itself was relentless. Boards to smooth, nails to hammer, sawdust to sweep. My palms blistered, my shoulders ached, but none of it hurt as much as the constant reminder that he was there, watching. I tried to act unaffected, but my body betrayed me. Every time he stepped closer, the hair at the back of my neck prickled. Every time he leaned down to adjust the angle of my work, I felt the air tighten between us. He spoke in short phrases, never wasting words. I, on the other hand, filled the silence with sarcasm, with bitter quips meant to drive him back. Yet the more I pushed, the more I realized he wouldn't bite. One evening, the room was nearly empty, the volunteers gone, leaving just the two of us in the dim light. The windows caught the last of the sun, painting the dust in gold. My hands were raw, my back stiff, and I dropped the sandpaper onto the bench with a sigh. "So this is it? My grand punishment? You watching me rub wood smooth until my hands fall off?" He looked up from his clipboard, brow furrowed, and for a moment I thought he might finally crack. But his voice was even. "Better than wasting yourself in a cell." I laughed, the sound bitter, echoing in the high rafters. "You think this fixes me? That a few weeks of playing carpenter changes anything?" His gaze didn't waver. He set the clipboard down, stepped closer, and rested a hand on the edge of the bench. No, but it gives you a chance to change yourself. The words hit harder than they should have, and I hated that. I hated that for a second. I couldn't think of a clever reply. The silence swelled again, thicker now, the kind that made every breath feel louder. I looked away first, dragging the sandpaper back to my palm, scratching it over the wood with unnecessary force. He didn't move, didn't speak, just let me stew in the heat of my own defiance. Day after day, the pattern repeated. I arrived with a scowl, worked with resentment, and spat words meant to cut. He answered with silence, with patience, with the unshakable calm of a man who refused to bend. That calm became a challenge of its own, more infuriating than any order or threat. It was as if he wanted me to reveal myself, to trip over my own temper, to prove that I couldn't stand the weight of his gaze. And maybe he was right. One afternoon, I slammed a plank down so hard it rattled the tools. You enjoy this, don't you? Watching me fight every second of this. My voice rose, rough and cracked with exhaustion. He walked over slowly, too slowly, and placed the plank back upright. His hand lingered on the wood, not on me, yet somehow the gesture felt like control all the same. I don't enjoy it, he said finally, his tone low. But I don't look away either. The provocation was unbearable. I wanted him to snap, to shove back, to break the mask of control he wore like armor. But he didn't. He turned his back, picked up his clipboard, and left me staring at the board, my chest heaving with words I couldn't say. At night, I carried the silence with me, heavier than the tools I'd lugged all day. I told myself I despised him, that the tension was nothing but hatred. But hatred shouldn't feel like this, sharp, unrelenting, alive in every glance and pause. Hatred shouldn't make the room crackle when two people stand too close without speaking. And yet, every morning when I walked through that door and saw him waiting, I felt that same current rising in my chest. I fought it with sarcasm. I fought it with stubbornness. I fought it with every careless swipe of sandpaper, every slammed tool, every muttered insult. And he fought it by doing nothing at all, by watching, by waiting, by holding himself steady like a wall I couldn't climb. The tension didn't fade. It built, plank by plank, silence by silence, until the workshop itself felt like a trap, holding us both in its walls. And still, I showed up the next day. The workshop had become a battlefield of silence and stubbornness, and I had learned to live with that. Every scrape of sandpaper, every hammer strike, every order he gave without raising his voice, it all pressed against me like a weight I refused to acknowledge. But then the day came when the pattern broke, when everything shifted in a way I hadn't expected, and I couldn't put the pieces back the way they had been. It started with the sound of falling wood. The workshop was alive with the usual noise, the rasp of saws, the clatter of nails, the hum of conversation from volunteers who didn't pay me much mind. I was bent over a plank, carving away splinters, when I saw the shadow out of the corner of my eye, a stack of boards tilting, groaning under their own weight. It happened fast, too fast to think, and I saw a man standing nearby, his back turned, oblivious. Something in me moved before my brain caught up. My body lunged, my hands grabbed, and I shoved the man away, just as the boards crashed down in a cloud of dust and splinters. The noise filled the room, sharp and violent, and when it cleared, the man was wide-eyed, unhurt, staring at me as though he couldn't understand what had just happened. My chest heaved, my palms stung, but I was standing alive, heart racing like I'd just outrun the law again. And then I saw him, Ethan, watching me from across the room, his gray eyes locked on mine, not with suspicion this time, not with that hard stare he always used to keep me in check. This was different. He studied me as if he was seeing something new, something he hadn't believed was there before. For a second, I wanted to look away, to smirk, to toss some sarcastic line about how I wasn't completely useless. But I didn't. I held his gaze, and it felt like a line had been drawn between us, invisible but undeniable. The man I'd saved stammered his thanks, brushed off his clothes, and left quickly, embarrassed by the attention. The workshop returned to its rhythm. but the air between me and Ethan didn't return to normal. It had thickened, heavier than before, not with hostility, but with something else I didn't want to name. Later, when the others had gone, I found myself sweeping up the last of the dust. He stayed too, moving slowly as he put tools away. The silence stretched, familiar but different now, like the rules had changed without either of us admitting it. He broke it first. "You didn't have to do that," he said, his voice quiet but certain. I leaned on the broom, scoffing. "What, let the guy get crushed? I may be a thief, but I'm not heartless." For once, he almost smiled. Almost. His eyes softened, the corners of his mouth twitching in a way that unsettled me more than his coldest stare. "I know," he said. Simple words, but they stayed with me long after he left that night. The storm came a few days later. Heavy clouds rolled in at dusk, swallowing what little light the town had. The wind howled through the streets, rattling shutters and bending trees. Rain hammered the roofs and poured down the gutters, turning the ground into rivers. Most people stayed indoors, lights flickering in their windows, voices muffled behind closed doors. But I couldn't stay still. Storms always set me on edge, made my skin itch with restlessness. I sat in my small rented room, candlelight flickering against the bare walls when the knock came. Sharp, quick, insistent. My pulse jumped. Nobody ever knocked for me. When I opened the door, there he was, Ethan, soaked to the bone, rain dripping from his jacket, hair plastered to his forehead. He stepped inside without waiting, shaking the water from his sleeves. "Power's out across half the town," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Want to make sure you weren't stuck in the dark." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, masking the unease that clawed at me. "I can handle candles." He looked around the room, eyes catching on the bare shelves, the single chair, the emptiness that said more about me than I wanted anyone to see. "I know you can," he said quietly, "but you don't have to handle it alone." Those words hit me harder than the storm outside. I busied myself with lighting another candle, setting it near the window where the wind leaked through the frame. The glow painted the room in flickering gold, shadows dancing across the walls. He hung his jacket by the door, the fabric heavy and dripping. We sat, me on the edge of the bed, him in the chair, and for a long while the only sound was the roar of the storm overhead. The tension was unbearable. I wanted to taunt him, to throw out some sharp remark that would put distance back between us. But the words stuck. Instead, I asked the one question that had haunted me since the workshop. "Why do you care?" My voice was low, rough. "I'm not your problem anymore. You've done your duty." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his eyes locked on mine. "It stopped being duty a while ago." The air thickened, charged with something I couldn't explain. I looked away, staring at the floor, my fists clenched to keep from trembling. He didn't press, didn't move closer, just let the silence stretch until I was the one who couldn't stand it anymore. I lifted my head, met his eyes, and for the first time, I didn't see a cop looking at a thief. I saw a man looking at another man, equal in the weight of what we carried. We spoke little that night, but it was enough. He told me about his father, about the long years working in a factory, about the discipline that had shaped him. I told him, haltingly, about my brother, about the toy boats we used to build before everything fell apart. The words came slow, heavy, but once spoken they couldn't be taken back. And in the sharing of them, something shifted. When the storm eased, he rose to leave, his jacket heavy in his hand. At the door, he paused, glanced back, and for a moment I thought he might say more. But he didn't. He just nodded once and stepped out into the fading rain. I closed the door behind him, touched the edge of the table where his hand had rested, and felt the silence of the room settle differently this time. It wasn't empty anymore. Something had changed, and though I wouldn't admit it aloud, I knew he had seen it too. The line between us, once a wall of suspicion and anger, had become something else. A line of trust, fragile and new, stretched tight between us. And whether I wanted it or not, I knew I would follow where it led. The town had a way of whispering louder than it spoke. It didn't take long for the rumors to spread. Too many eyes in too small a place. Too many mouths eager to fill the silence with half-truths and sharp-edged guesses. At first it was just looks, The kind you feel burning into your back when you walk down the street, the kind that linger too long to be casual. Then came the murmurs, drifting through the diner, muttered near the hardware store, words that weren't meant for me to hear, but always carried far enough. They said my name with a curl of suspicion, paired it with his, as though together we had committed some unspeakable crime. I try to laugh it off. I'd lived under suspicion my whole life. Being the town's favorite screw-up wasn't new. But this was different. This time it wasn't just about me. This time the whispers reached him too, and I saw the weight of it in the way people's smiles froze when he walked into a room, in the silence that fell too quickly when he stood at the counter. Ethan carried it with that same composure he always had, shoulders straight, jaw set, like no rumor could touch him. But I knew better. I saw the flicker in his eyes when old friends turned away, when even his own father barely gave him more than a curt nod before walking past. The first time I saw it happen, I felt something twist in my chest. We were crossing the square, the new bench gleaming in the late afternoon sun, when his father appeared from the other side. I slowed, waiting for some acknowledgement, but the older man's eyes swept right past us, cold, dismissive, as though his own son were a stranger. Ethan's face didn't change, not outwardly, but I could feel the tension ripple through him like a current. He said nothing, kept walking, but I caught the flick of his throat as he swallowed it down. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words clung to my tongue, heavy and useless. My own circle wasn't much better. The guys I used to run with, the ones who had always been quick to offer a drink or a job in some back alley, now looked at me with narrowed eyes and smirks sharp enough to cut. One of them cornered me behind a bakery one evening, his voice low, his breath stinking of stale cigarettes. "You've changed, Alex," he said, his tone half accusation, half sneer. "Trading us for him, huh? Thought you were one of us." I bristled, shoved my hands in my pockets, told him I wasn't trading anyone, but the words felt hollow. He leaned in closer, his smile cruel. "You'll come crawling back. Guys like us don't get clean. We just pretend until we can't anymore." Then he walked off, leaving me standing there, fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. The doubts gnawed at me. Every whisper, every cold stare, every accusation dug deeper. Who was I kidding? A thief trying to play honest? A screw-up pretending at redemption? I started to believe them, to think maybe I was nothing more than what I'd always been. And once that thought lodged in my head, it was hard to shake. One night, I found myself pacing outside the workshop long after the doors had closed. The streets were empty, the storm drains still running with rain from earlier. My mind buzzed with the voices of the town, the weight of my past pressing down. I thought about slipping back into old habits. Just one job, one quick grab to remind myself of who I really was. It would be easy the way it had always been. My fingers twitched with the memory of wallets, of fast hands, of escape. For a moment, I almost convinced myself it was the only way out of this trap I'd build around myself. That's when he found me. His voice cut through the night, low but firm. "Don't." I froze, the words striking harder than any shout. He stepped out of the shadows, rain still glistening on his jacket, his eyes fixed on me with that same unshakable steadiness. "Whatever you're thinking, stop." Anger flared up, hot and defensive. "What do you know about it?" I snapped. "You don't live with this. You don't hear them every time you walk down the street. You don't have everyone waiting for you to fail." My voice cracked, sharp and raw. "I can't breathe here, Ethan. I can't keep pretending." He didn't move closer, didn't raise his voice. He just stood there, hands at his sides, his expression unreadable. "You think going back fixes it? You think proving them right is the answer?" I laughed, bitter and hollow. "Maybe it's the only thing I'm good at." For a long moment, he said nothing, and the silence pressed against me harder than any words. Then he stepped forward, slow, deliberate, closing the space between us. His eyes never left mine. "You've got a choice, Alex. Run back to the man they already decided you are, or fight to be the man you know you could be. But you don't get to do both." The words hit me like a blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. My chest tightened, my throat burned. I wanted to argue, to push him away with sarcasm and anger like I always did, but nothing came. The storm drains gurgled, the air hung heavy with damp, and for the first time I couldn't find a way out. He didn't wait for an answer. He just turned, started walking back toward the square, his voice carrying over his shoulder. You decide, but decide for yourself, not for them. I stood there a long time, the rain dripping from the eaves, my fists still clenched, my heart pounding. The old life called to me, sharp and familiar, but his words lingered, louder than the whispers of the town. Run or fight, pretend or prove. For once, the choice was mine, and for the first time in a long time, I wanted to believe I still had one. The morning air carried the sharp bite of early winter, but I walked toward the workshop with a steadiness I hadn't felt in weeks. My boots struck the damp pavement with purpose, puddles scattering beneath each step, and for once I didn't look over my shoulder to see who might be whispering in the shadows. They were still there, of course, the stares, the murmurs, the judgment that clung to me like a second skin, but something inside me had shifted. I had stood at the edge, close enough to taste the old life, close enough to fall back into it, and Ethan's words had pulled me back. Not with threats, not with orders, but with something heavier, a choice. And I had made it. The workshop doors creaked as I pushed them open. Inside, the smell of sawdust hung thick, mingling with varnish and the faint scent of damp wood drying after days of rain. The place felt almost like a second home now, though I would never say it aloud. My hands, once clumsy with the tools, moved with an ease that surprised me. The rhythm of sanding, hammering, sweeping, it had become a language of its own. And in the center of it all was him. Ethan stood by the benches, sleeves rolled up, clipboard set aside for once. He looked up as I entered, eyes scanning me the way they always did, steady and searching. But there was something different in the way his gaze lingered. Not suspicion, not control, something quieter, more deliberate, as though he was checking if I had truly returned to him, not just to the work. We said little as the day began. Words weren't necessary. The tasks themselves filled the silence, lifting planks, sanding edges, carrying tools back and forth. But the silence wasn't the sharp, hostile kind anymore. It was measured, patient, a silence that held space instead of cutting through it. I felt it in the way our movements began to fall into rhythm, how I could predict when he'd reach for a tool before he even moved, how his presence no longer suffocated but steadied me. The bench came together slowly, piece by piece, board by board, until it began to take shape beneath our hands. We worked side by side, the sound of nails driven into it echoing like a heartbeat in the wide room. Sweat gathered at my brow, muscles burning from the strain, but I didn't mind. For once, I wanted the weight. It grounded me, reminded me I was still here, still fighting for something beyond myself. When the last nail was set and the final board smoothed, we stood back to look at it. The bench wasn't perfect. The lines were slightly uneven, the varnish darker in some spots than others. But it was solid, real, built not by one pair of hands, but by two. Ethan's shoulder brushed mine as we stood there. I didn't move away. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The bench said enough. The next day, we carried it to the park. The square was alive with voices, children darting between the trees, vendors calling from their stalls. As we set the bench down beneath the tall oak, heads turned. Whispers stirred, just as they always did. I felt the weight of eyes pressing into my back, waiting for me to stumble, to prove their judgment right. But I kept my grip firm on the wood, my chin raised, and when Ethan caught my glance, he gave the faintest nod. Not approval, not reassurance, just a reminder that I wasn't standing there alone. We fastened the bench into place, the sound of the hammer carrying across the square. When it was done, we stepped back again, shoulders almost touching, and looked at the work we had left behind. Children ran past, laughing, already climbing onto it as though it had always been part of the park. And in that moment, the whispers around us dimmed. Ethan lowered himself onto the bench first, his movements deliberate, his face calm. He tilted his head toward the empty space beside him. No words, just the invitation. My chest tightened, but I sat down anyway. The wood creaked softly beneath our weight, solid and unyielding. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I didn't feel the urge to get up and leave. We sat there as the afternoon light bled gold across the town, the oak's branches swaying above us, the voices of the square rising and falling like the tide. People passed, some glancing our way, some pretending not to see. I felt their judgment as surely as ever, but it no longer clawed at me. It was there, yes, but it didn't define me. Not anymore. Ethan's voice broke the quiet, low and steady. You stayed. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Yeah, I stayed. The words tasted strange, heavy, but true. He nodded once, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun dipped lower. We didn't speak after that. We didn't need to. The bench beneath us, the town around us, the silence we shared, it was enough. And for the first time, I looked at the road ahead without fear. I didn't know what waited for us. More whispers, more judgment, more battles, no doubt. But I also knew that I had made my choice, and that he had made his. We sat side by side, the weight of the past behind us, the future stretching wide before us. And as the shadows lengthened and the square filled with the sounds of life, I realized that this was what a new beginning felt like. Not perfect, not easy, but ours.